Well, it's great to be back again. I feel like I'm home now. I feel like I don't really need that introduction each week because you all know me. I know most of you anyway. And I just look forward to this, to our time together very much. It's Brookline, Mass. They're very sensitive about that. It's not Brooklyn, it's Brookline.
I did not know that.
Yes, L-I-N-E. And it's understandable why they're sensitive. So, we just heard a wonderful story. Let's start another story. It's 1945. It's the Sinai Peninsula in Egypt. Several men are riding their camels, looking for fuel. There has been some unusual weather, and some earth has fallen from the cliff above, and they're thinking maybe that loosens some material they can use for fuel. So one of them, whose name, you can't make this stuff up, is Muhammad Ali, notices something in the ground, and he brushes away, and it's like a bowl upside down, and he brushes more, and the bowl is sealed to an urn, a very large urn, and he isn't sure he wants to. He's a little superstitious, so he wasn't sure that it's a good idea to open it because who knows what may come out. Demons may come out and fly around. But then again, he remembers the story of Aladdin, and it could be, could be a genie saying you have 3 wishes. So he decides to open it, and he later says that gold dust flew through the air, and it's almost certainly that was fragments of parchment drifting, because that's what the urn contained. It contained what have come to be known as the Nag Hammadi writings. And it took a while. I'm not going to go through the whole story. It's kind of scary how close we came to never knowing they were there, because first of all, he burned some of them because he needed the fuel. That's what he was looking for. And it took him a long time to get anybody to pay attention when he finally decided they were worth following up on. They were worth bringing to the attention of the church. Among those writings, most of the writings were early versions of Gospels and writings we already had, so they're just sort of confirming. And it's always interesting when you're dealing with that, especially with parchments, to see how different the different versions of the same Gospel can be, because they're copying it by hand, and we know that every once in a while the copier got carried away and added a little of his own in there, to clarify things. So that's all fascinating. And there was what has come to be known as the Gospel of Thomas. Well, because that's what it's called, the Gospel of Thomas. Now, we knew there was such a thing as the Gospel of Thomas because the church fathers, the early writers of the church, wrote careful explanations of why nobody should read it and why it was not acceptable in the canon of the church. So we had the criticism of the gospel, but we had never seen the gospel. Why is that? Well, it has to do with the conversion of Constantine. When Constantine, the Roman Empire, converted to Christianity, having seen the cross in the sky and followed it to victory, he said, in a typical Roman fashion, you guys have got to get your act together. You've got all kinds of different opinions flying around here. You've got different books. You've got different teachers, different preachers saying different things about who Jesus was and what he meant and what he wasn't, and how that all works. You need to get organized. So they called the Council of Nicaea, and they said, okay, what do we believe and what do we not? And what books are we going to accept? And what books are we not going to accept? And Constantine ordered that all the books not being accepted should be every copy of them should be destroyed around the empire. Every copy. Now, this is my interpolation into the story, but I'm sure this is correct. There had been a monastery on the top of this cliff, and it was long gone at this time, but it had been there. And I'm convinced that some sweet, passionate monk who had spent years of his life painstakingly copying these manuscripts, when he got the order that said, destroy it all, he couldn't bring himself to do it. And so he carefully put them in the urn, sealed it up, buried it in the ground, hoping that someday somebody would find it and it would be useful. So that's the story of the Gospel of Thomas. Our working with it dates back to, about 1948, once they got it translated. It was written in the Coptic. The version, the copy that they found was written in the Coptic language, so that involved some translation and some discussion. And then it became very controversial. Do we make it a fifth gospel? Some people do. The Funk project that published the 5 Gospels, new translations of the 5 Gospels, included it as a fifth gospel. Many people do, many people do not. Fundamentalists and evangelicals say, no, it's just an inferior version of what we already have, and it is not acceptable, it's not okay to pay any attention to it. Other people disagree. There are so many translations and editions of the Gospel of Thomas. They are all good. They all have something to offer. I think I have 4 different ones that I work with. But this is one that is with a commentary by Harold Bloom, who is a cranky critic that I just love. I mean, he's not happy about anything pretty much, unless it's Shakespeare or Cervantes. But what he says about this is that the Gospel of Thomas spares us the crucifixion, makes resurrection unnecessary, and does not present us with a God named Jesus. So why does it make resurrection unnecessary? Well, because it's about eternal life. It's about what an illusion death is and how important it is to move through the illusion to claim our truth. So in that mindset, there's no need for resurrection because there's no death to resurrect from, And does not present us with a God named Jesus because in the Gospel of Thomas, Jesus is constantly trying to empower his followers. He's not claiming power for himself. He's not asking them to worship him, to build him a church, to honor him in any way. He's much more in the tradition of an Eastern teacher, an Eastern mystic. He comes, he goes, he's there, he's not there. Nobody quite understands, but everybody, just sort of accepts that. Asks him questions when they can and receives answers that they don't understand. Because in the Gospel of Thomas, as in a lot of Eastern writings, the emphasis is not on answers, it's on questions. The point is to be asking the question. And it almost doesn't matter what answer you come up with. If you're asking the question, you're moving in the right direction. You're focusing on the right points, the right questions to ask. John Dominic Crossan, who is one of the great New Testament scholars of our time, says that the gospel offers a brokerless kingdom of heaven. It is all about the kingdom of heaven, more so really than the other gospel, the 4 main gospels. But it's a brokerless kingdom of heaven. There's no go-between. There's no intermediary. You don't need the church, is what I'm trying to say here. It's about you personally and your personal relationship to the divine. It's not about trusting someone or something else to interpret that for you. A broker sort of is a go-between. We don't need a go-between. We just need to be asking the right questions and open to those answers. The gospel consists of 114, they're called logi, which is hard to translate. They're incidents, they're teachings, they're moments in the ministry of Jesus. There is absolutely no interest in the Gospel of Thomas in what happened to Jesus. The story isn't there. The emphasis is on what did he say? What did he teach? What do we carry away? So the next question, I think, is who is Thomas? Who is this guy who seems to have a totally different take on the ministry of which he was a part? Well, he's included, of course, in all 4 of the canonical Gospels. But in 3 of them, in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, he's just a walk-on. His name is there as one of the disciples, but we're never told anything about him. He's never involved in any way. In John, we have the famous Doubting Thomas incident, and that's the only sort of spark of personality we see, that according to the Gospel of John, he was the doubter who wanted proof of the resurrection. In the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, which we've been looking at the past couple of times I've been over, Thomas is very important. He is there as one of the disciples who have been called together after Jesus has left and gathered together to say, well, how are we going to do this? What are we going to teach, and how are we going to teach it? And as we've talked, there was a great schism, according to the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. Peter said, I'm not going to listen to a woman. I don't think Jesus could possibly have given his greatest teachings to a woman. So, no. And most of the apostles joined him and went out, and their first emphasis was on fitting into Judaism. They wanted to make Jesus the last of the Jewish prophets. And so they focused on sort of getting along with Judaism. So they would go to temple in the morning, and then they would have a gathering in the afternoon, a meal in the afternoon. And out of that came the Christian church. And out of that came structure. And out of that came new laws. It's interesting that the very last thing Jesus says to the apostles in the Gospel of Mary Magdalene is, don't make any more laws. You don't need any more laws. No more. Well, that hasn't totally been obeyed, has it? Those of us who grew up Catholic know that it was a dizzying amount of laws that you had to focus on, or how many years in purgatory you'd get if you didn't. So it's a gospel that is about your personal relationship to the divine. And I think the best way to work with it is just to look at a couple of these logi and see how it works, how it sounds. And it gets clear right off the bat that this is a different Jesus. It's a different understanding of Jesus. And to finish up with who is Thomas, I've had the great opportunity to visit India. And there are, scattered around India, there are churches and sent mosques that tradition says Thomas founded. Their tradition says that Thomas left Mary Magdalene, came over to India. Could be, makes sense to me. And that it's because his teachings were more Eastern, that's where he was more accepted and more understood. So it all sort of fits together. These are the hidden sayings that the living Jesus spoke and that Didymus Justus Thomas wrote down. The second logion, Jesus said, the seeker should not stop until he finds. When he does find, he will be disturbed. After having been disturbed, he will be astonished. Then he will reign over everything. Right off the bat, you're getting something that you don't get in the other Gospels, I think. And it is a perfect description of the spiritual journey. It's a perfect description of the hero's journey, because, as you mentioned, that's part of my passion. We have to be willing to search. All of the Beatitudes are blessing the people who are searching, who are seeking, who are not satisfied. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are the poor. Blessed are the people for whom the status quo is not working. Because those are the ones who are encouraged to seek for something more, something else, and those are the ones my ministry is about. Those are the ones I want to talk to. So blessed are the poor, blessed are those who mourn. It's a way of recognizing that you have to be willing to seek. You have to have a passion for seeking. And that is harder to do if you're really very comfortable in the status quo. That's why he later says, it's really difficult for a rich man to get into this because he's got so much, he's got so much already. He's not seeking, he's not searching, he's not hungry. Now, some of them probably are, but I'm generalizing, but that's what he is sort of saying. So the seeker should not stop until he finds. Don't settle. And find for yourself. Don't find someone else who will tell you what the kingdom of heaven is all about. Seek until you find. When you find, you will be disturbed. Now, who here can't relate to that? Who here, having found our way to these unity principles, didn't find our life totally shaken up? How many of us have tried to go back? I'd like to think I'd like to forget I knew this. I'd like to forget I learned this, and just go back to when everything was everybody else's fault and I was the victim. But those were good old days. Those were the good old days because I just had to sit here and feel sorry for myself. Now I've got to assume some responsibility. It's very disturbing. These principles are very, very disturbing. And after having been disturbed, he will be astonished. And you've had that experience too. All of a sudden, I can't believe when I look back over my 25 years in ministry, how simplistic some of my early understandings seem to me now. How astonishing Charles Fillmore is every time I open a Fillmore book. Not easy to read, but the principles, what he's saying is absolutely astonishing. What Jesus says is absolutely astonishing if you really take him at his word and think he meant what he said, and don't let somebody else tell you what he was really meaning. So then he will reign over everything. Once you get over the astonishment, once you realize the full implications of these teachings, these 5 principles that you affirm one at a time every Sunday, those principles are not just nice things to say together. Those are powerful, powerful, universal spiritual principles. Universal. There's nothing in the Gospel of Thomas that suggests Jesus was trying to create a religion of any kind. He was there as a spiritual teacher. He was there to inspire those who were drawn to him. He didn't go out seeking, He didn't hire a PR firm to see how he could increase his ministry. He just taught. And he was there when they needed him, and he was gone when they didn't. Jesus said, this is Logan 3, if your leaders say to you, look, the kingdom is in the sky, then the birds will be there before you are. If they say that the kingdom is in the sea, then the fish will be there before you are. Rather, the kingdom is within you and it is outside of you. When you understand yourselves, you will be understood, and you will realize that you are sons of the living Father. If you do not know yourselves, then you exist in poverty, and you are the poverty. Ooh, talk about uncomfortable. Well, jeez. Get over yourself, Jesus. It's a little hard to understand, but he's saying you can't make yourself a victim. There is no room on the spiritual path for victimhood once you get started with it. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and it's not something that's dated. We don't read the Gospel of Thomas. I don't anyway. And you, Sharon, you said you read it this week. It's very alive today. I believe passionately that it wasn't by accident that it was put away for all those centuries and found again in 1945. And it's taken years now for it to begin to be more widely dispersed and understood. But we weren't ready for it before. The collective consciousness wasn't ready for it. there's every good reason that it wasn't included in the early versions of the Bible, because it was too advanced and it's too personal. At that time, people still needed an organization. They needed a church. There's a wonderful, I'm roaming, but that's okay. There's a wonderful chapter in the Brothers Karamazov, Dostoevsky, when the Grand Inquisitor, Jesus comes back in the middle of the Spanish Inquisition, when the church is putting people to death and putting people to torture, and he comes back to the Grand Inquisitor and says, "Oh, this isn't what I meant. That you're doing this in my name," and no, that's not my message. And the Grand Inquisitor says, in effect, "We know that. This is what the people can handle now. This is what the people expect now." And of course, that's true, isn't it? Because collective consciousness, it's our collective consciousness that decides to judge and punish instead of open ourselves to love. This is one I loved. Jesus said, "When you give rise to that which is within you, what you give rise to will save you. When you do not give rise to that which is within you, what you do not give rise to will destroy you." When you get in touch with your spiritual truth, it will be your salvation. It will transform your life. It will allow you to understand why you are a spiritual being here in human form. That's the great question, it seems to me. I really fully get that we are spiritual beings and we're here in human form. Why? Whoever thought this would be a good idea? To leave the freedom of spirit and come into these limited, aging bodies that give us so much challenge and trouble. Why should we do this? And you will find that out when you give rise to that which is within you. Or another translation says, when you give birth to that which is within you. What you're giving birth to will save you. If you do not give birth to it, if you know it's there, and you refuse to share it, you refuse to admit it, you refuse to work with it, you refuse to give birth to it so that it can work in your life, it will destroy you. It will destroy you. Not like you'll go to hell forever and ever, but your purpose in living this life will be negated. You'll get through this life, through the door, through the gate, whatever happens at death, into the accounting room, and there will have been nothing to show for it, because you've refused to follow the path. You've refused to accept the truth. You've heard the truth. On some level, you believe the truth, but you don't act the truth. You don't give birth to it. You don't make it your contribution to the world. You don't make it how the world sees you. We can be so afraid, can't we? It can be because it makes us out of step. It makes us out of step with everyone around us. And so many of us try to compromise our principles, compromise those universal principles that we have found. You had to have found them, you wouldn't be here this morning. We try to compromise, we try to hide, we tell ourselves, well, I'm not going to let this out because they wouldn't understand anyway, so I'll act according to their principles because I don't think they would understand if I acted according to mine. Yeah? Yeah, and we do that a lot. Just, to keep the peace. Jesus said, I didn't come to keep the peace. He very specifically said, I didn't come to keep the peace. Yes, it will put us in conflict sometimes with other people. That doesn't matter. What matters is that we are true to our principles and we are living them. That's the fifth principle that we affirm together today. We live our principles. We don't just study them, memorize them, read them. We put them into expression. We put them into our human experience. And through that, we discover what our spiritual purpose is in being here. And boy, is that worth it, isn't it? Just just occasionally stumbling across something that gives you a hint, you know. Some of you know that I have recently, it's been 6 months now, been writing for Daily Word. And they send me, you know, a number of lessons, and I write the material, I choose the Bible verse, and I send it back. And it's fairly anonymous, like Silent Unity. They don't give a credit. It's not an individual credit. It's just Daily Word. But I ask, and I'm allowed to, from time to time, point out to someone, like to you guys, that one of them was one I wrote, and this morning's was one I wrote. And I didn't know that because I hadn't looked at the Daily Word before I came. I was too busy with this. So when I heard it being read here, it was, I can't explain what, it was just this thrill of, don't you sometimes find yourself saying, I didn't even know I knew that. And if I know it, why aren't I using it in my own life? You know, it's helping other people with it, and, you know, physician, heal thyself. So we're going to spend another Sunday with the Gospel of Thomas. We're going to be looking at the kingdom of heaven in particular. What is the kingdom of heaven in Thomas as opposed to what it is in the other Gospels, where they sort of have to acknowledge that Jesus said it, but they're not at all comfortable with understanding what he meant by it. It's just something that they'd rather not have to deal with. Here, it's the whole point. It's absolutely the whole point. As Crossan says, it's a brokerless kingdom of heaven. What do we... I'm sorry?
No.
Oh. Talking back is fine with me, by the way. This isn't performance art. So if you have questions or comments, never hesitate to interrupt me. I love it. Don't worry about it at all. Jesus said, the kingdom of the Father is like a woman who was carrying a jar full of grain. As she walked along, a handle of her jar broke off and grain trickled out, but she didn't notice. When she arrived in her house, she put the jar down and found it empty. You can find that parables similar to that in Hindu religion, in Indian literature. So what does it mean? Well, let's picture it. The jar is full of grain, covered over. So what is the grain? What does that... Sorry? Thoughts? Our thoughts? Okay. Yeah. It's what we carry, right? It's what we bring into life. It's what we're here to deliver. What we don't notice is that we are delivering it without even knowing it.
Oh, I see.
Because the grain is falling out as we go through life, as we go through situations and confrontations, and as we face choices. The grain leaks, and the grain leaks, and the grain leaks. And he says the kingdom of heaven is like getting there and finding your vessel is empty. You're here to scatter that grain. And don't worry about where you should scatter it. You don't have anything to say about that. It's just going to scatter while you move. Just live your life. Just walk your path. And when you get to the end of the path, if you've reached kingdom of heaven consciousness, then there won't be any grain left because you will have shared it. You will have left it. Yeah? So it's not like, oh God, I lost all my grain, I've got to go back and start again. No. Congratulations. Saying that that's exactly the kingdom of heaven. The kingdom of heaven is knowing that you have left grain and sowed seeds all the way along. And didn't have to worry about, is this part of my path or not? You just centered yourself in who you are. Accept the choices that are yours to make. Trust the guidance that you now know lives within you. And move forward. And the seed will take care of itself without you having to worry about it. And if you get to the end of it, you know, my grandmother, my grandmother had a wonderful house full of tchotchkes, you know, just things on the mantelpiece, on all of the tables, and the door, on top of the doilies. Remember doilies? And every time when we drove down there when I was a kid, my mother would say what? Don't touch anything.
Oh yeah, like
Go through the house, straight into the backyard. The grown-ups are going to stay in here. Don't touch anything. So I would be so careful not to touch anything. In the summer, I would occasionally get to spend a week down at my grandmother's by myself. She wanted me to touch everything. She wanted to tell me the stories, where it came from, why it's important. She was all about, living it, use these things, appreciate them, listen to the stories. It was a whole different consciousness. And I think so much of religion is about trying to get through life without touching anything, without breaking anything, without taking any chances. Just find the easiest way through and care so that when you get to the end, you still have all your grain because you haven't relaxed enough to share it. Yeah? But Jesus is saying, live it. Use your grain. Be your spiritual self in this human experience. And when you get to the end and you've used all your grain, that's when you know you're expressing the kingdom of heaven. Because the grain isn't necessarily, good works and, gifts and things, selfless things I've done for others. That's all part of it, of course. But it's also times when I've had a really, really good time. Like Friday night. Wish I could have been here. Those are seed experiences. Those are seed experiences. Those are grain. They plant seeds. They grow. They nurture. When we nurture them, they grow into new possibilities. So that's an expression of our seed too. We don't get to know, is this a seed moment or not? Make a choice. Trust your guidance. Make a choice. And you can make anything into a seed moment without having to worry about it at all. So I hope this has been interesting. I hope you can understand my enthusiasm for this gospel, my passion around it. It's simply a Jesus that I can relate to. Because there's not a lot of stuff I have to believe. He doesn't care what I believe about him. He doesn't care what I believe about him. He cares what I believe about myself. He wants me to think more highly of myself than I ever had. He doesn't care if I find the Christ in him. I have to find the Christ in myself. You have to find the Christ in yourself. And then trust it. And move forward, knowing that in Christ consciousness, and it is very possible to reach Christ consciousness and to stay there. Not all the time, because we're still in this human experience, but a lot of the time you can spend in Christ consciousness. Knowing that everything you do, everyone you meet, is a seed that you're leaving behind, that you're planting, that is going to grow after you've gone. Must have been kind of amazing to be Jesus, well, in many ways, of course, but knowing that from the time he came into Christ consciousness, which is symbolized by his baptism in the Jordan, everything, absolutely everything he did, everything he said, every choice he made was a lesson. It was a seed. And he knew that. He had the consciousness to know it at the time. And so imagine going through a day thinking, I'm doing nothing but scattering seeds. I'm doing nothing but scattering seeds. So I hope you scatter a few seeds this week and see how it feels. Okay? Blessings.